and ill treatment. And today I state in our opener that 26th of this month of June is globally celebrated or commemorated to sit down and as countries get to analyze and synthesize and ask where are we in the fight against torture and ill treatment. And great, our theme for this year being support torture survivors to report and access justice. Now, many people undergo torture, they are ill treated, but some never report. Or in most of the cases when they do report, there have been reports about not being able to access justice or the process itself being extremely hard. That's the reason why we are holding up this particular conversation this afternoon. We want to say a very special thank you to the Coalition Against Torture in Uganda that is chaired by the African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims, SCTV. We also want to thank Uganda Human Rights Commission for making this happen. Plus the partners, that's the United Nations Office for the High Commissioner on Human Rights. We also have the German Corporation in Uganda, GIZ, together with the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders. Like I said, this discussion is coming through as Uganda is in the second phase of a lockdown with issues of gender-based violence that could come through because not so many are used to staying with your kids and your spouses all throughout from morning to the evening. That is why this discussion is necessitated. We'll be going on Zoom and live here at Plot 13 Agoro Summit View. My name is Mildred Tuhaise, and I will in just a bit be introducing to you the guests that we will be having. We cannot talk about torture. Sometimes people think that when we talk about torture and ill treatment, it's just a discussion for statistics and funders and, partners, global partners to come through and just have the discussion. But I'm glad to introduce to you a survivor of torture right here with me in studio. That is Wamani Joachim Kim. Thank you so much for joining us, and you can say hello to our viewers.
Hello, viewers. Good afternoon, everyone out there. I'm a torture victim survivor, and I have a story here to share with you today.
I can't wait. I definitely can't wait to hear through what that story has and entails and how much we can be able to learn from it. I also have, in no particular order, Ms. Irene Nachimbugwe, who is the Deputy Public Relations Officer at the Office of the DPP, and we are talking about prosecution and access to justice. It will be an interesting discussion to come through. Ms. Irene, please say hello to us and the viewers.
Good afternoon, viewers. I'm happy to be here.
Happy to have you too. We'll get to see, they normally say justice delayed is justice denied, but we'll find out whether there are delays or it is actually the process that is hard or easy to be able to come through. I do also have in studio with me, I am joined, of course, by another guest that I will be introducing to you. But first of all, let me introduce to you the people who are online. I'll be joined by Robert Kochani, who is the United Nations High Commission for Human Rights, who will also be joining us to speak on behalf of Dr. Katevalira Motuwairumba, the acting chairperson of the Uganda Human Rights Commission. He will be joining me online, but also I will be having Isaac Owona, who is an assistant superintendent police legal. He will also be talking to us. Of course, when we have reports with regard to torture and ill treatment, police and security organs have, of course, been ranking very, very highly in that as being perpetrators. We'll be discussing what the problem could be. With me in studio as well is Ms. Ida Nachiganda, who is the Director of Complaints, Investigations and Legal Services at the Uganda Human Rights Commission. Ida, it's a pleasure having you.
Thank you, Mildred, and good afternoon to all our viewers.
Good afternoon to you. Now, I would like us to start off with Mr. Robert Kochani from the United Nations High Commission for Human Rights to speak to us. Many would ask why all these, international days and commemorations, why would they even be coming through at such a point in time when we are talking about something that is seemingly negative? Over to you, Mr. Kochani.
Thank you so much, Mildred, and the Director of Complaints, Investigation and Legal Services of UHRC, my sister Ida, the Deputy Public Relations Officer, Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, Sister Irene, the Assistant Superintendent of Police, Legal Officer of Human Rights Desk, Uganda Police Forces, Isaac, Brother Isaac, torture survivor African Center for the Treatment and Rehabilitation of Victims of Torture, ACTV, Brother Joachim Kim. Dear panelists, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, viewers and participants online, I wish to most sincerely thank the Coalition Against Torture for the opportunity to share on the topic of this year's commemoration of the International Day in Support of Victims of Torture, which, as Mildred said, is support torture survivors to report and access justice. And the African Center for Rehabilitation and Treatment of Torture Victims and many other international human rights organizations and interlocutors to promote the right to freedom from torture, degrading, and inhuman treatment. As the country representative for the UN Human Rights Office in Uganda, I wish to greet all of you wherever you are watching and listening to this public dialogue, especially the survivors of torture, as well as all the other members of the Coalition Against Torture that have achieved remarkable milestones today in the fight for the right to freedom from torture, degrading, inhuman treatment in Uganda. It is very encouraging to see this level of attention being paid to the topic of preventing torture and inhuman treatment, especially while the world is responding to COVID-19 pandemic. Uganda, of course, is a party to various international and regional human rights instruments. Uganda has also domesticated laws against torture, cruel and inhuman treatment, including the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act of 2012. However, cases of torture, cruel and inhuman treatment persist in the country. This trend requires strategic partnership and advocacy if we are to collectively and effectively address the challenges in a more comprehensive, constructive, and conclusive manner. During the next hour and a half, this dialogue will discuss recent developments and trends regarding the effective implementation of the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act 2012, including access to justice and the need for quality rehabilitation services for survivors of torture, sharing good practices and innovative approaches to reduce the risk of torture and ill treatment, including in the context of COVID-19. I thank the panelists for their participation, and I look forward to hearing about their experiences in their respective jurisdictions. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, viewers, during the 2021 general election, cases of torture, inhuman and ill treatment, enforced disappearances, intimidation, and brutality allegedly committed by security agencies were reported in both the mainstream and online media platforms. We support the government of Uganda and other stakeholders' efforts to end impunity, and we call for perpetrators of such human rights violations to be held accountable and the victims be granted due reparation. A year and a half now into the COVID-19 pandemic, infections rates are dropping in some part of the world, with life slowly returning to normality. However, the virus is resurging and spreading rapidly in other areas, including here in Uganda, unfortunately. Throughout this period, we have seen how the global health crisis has created unprecedented challenges for the protection of human rights worldwide, including the prohibition against torture. The need to enforce public health regulations, including during COVID-19 time, has frequently resulted in violation of international norms and standards on the use of force. Too often, we have seen law enforcement officials use force unnecessarily or disproportionately against people breaking curfews or other confinement measures, for example. The human rights situation for detainees has been particularly severe. The pandemic has unfolded alongside a worldwide prison crisis characterized by record numbers of people in prisons globally. These levels of overcrowding, along with restricted access to hygiene and healthcare, have left detainees exponentially more vulnerable to the virus. The UN Human Rights Office has long established that prison overcrowding, including its adverse effects on the right to health, constitutes to the least degrading treatment. The pandemic is also leading to an escalation of torture and ill treatment in detention centers by slowing or suspending judicial oversight of these places independent and credible documenting of the material and living conditions of detainees are indispensable for safeguarding the prohibition against torture and ill treatment. These must always be part of the overall COVID-19 response. Fortunately, there are innovative responses to these challenges, such as early release of certain categories of low-risk detainees and development of healthcare measures for detainees in close relationship with public health institutions. We are equally encouraged as the UN Human Rights Office in Uganda by the more professional and human way in which security operatives have so far been implementing measures edited by the head of state for this second COVID-19 lockdown, and we encourage all security operatives to keep such habits while enforcing the measures. As I conclude, I wish to urge all of us to elaborate on these and other promising new developments. In that regard, I wish everyone a fruitful discussion and reiterate full support to the outcome of this e-dialogue. I look forward to continued cooperation and collaboration with the Uganda government and all stakeholders, and as we strive to eradicate torture in Uganda. #Justice for Torture Survivors. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robert Kuchani, who is from the UN Human Rights Office. It's a pleasure. He did highlight and hint on a number of issues, particularly now talking about the implementation of the standard operating procedures and curfew guidelines, talking about how some security officers actually overdo it, for lack of a better word. They do it in a much unnecessary force is used in implementation of this standard operating procedure. Yes, sometimes people can't be spoken to, and they will definitely understand. He also talks about the overcrowdedness in prisons, which is a degrading treatment, and probably it's upon that background that the president said, this time when you go against the guidelines, we are not arresting you. You pay an express penalty because we don't even have space for you to be in the prisons. But how real is the aspect of torture? How better can we even talk about that than talk to a survivor of torture himself, and that is Wamani Joachim. When torture is being talked about on the media, sometimes the talk is that the media is blowing it out of proportion, you know, you're not reporting right. But take us through your experience, your own personal experience of torture, but there is also the aspect of reporting. Did you get the guts to go ahead and report? Did you even access justice? Let's first of all look at your story.
Thank you, Mildred. Thank you, viewers outside there. My name's Wamani Joachim. As I've been introduced by Mildred, I'm a torture victim survivor. I want to share with you today my experience and what I went through when I was in prisons. You know, when you're in prisons, they have like in Luzira prisons, they have a detention cell.
Okay.
Well,
first of all, when you go to prison, were you sentenced? Had you already been sentenced? Were you on remand?
By then, I was a judgment debtor.
Okay.
I was taken there by someone who claimed that he had. We had an agreement in between that he had borrowed me money. They took me there. As I was serving my sentence, two officers, ASP Amosh Michael and Principal 1, John Okedi, called me. They were like that I had a smartphone in my room. I had a smartphone in my room. I tried to excuse myself. I was like, you...
In the prison?
In the prisons.
Okay.
I tried to excuse myself, and I told them I never had that phone in my room.
Okay.
Please, you find ways of helping me get out of this. Because I've been here on other cases, and you are alleging that I had a smartphone in my room.
Okay.
ASP Amosh ordered this OP, Principal Officer 1, Okedi. They poured water in the detention room. I was humiliated, degraded. They took me under punishment. I was humiliated in general. They took me under that detention, poured full of water, they made me sleep there for 2 weeks in that detention. And
with the water?
With the water inside it. And at that time, I couldn't access justice because no one would visit me at that time. I was in that detention. I had no access to my people. Neither to call them and inform them where I was.
So it was actually a detention center, not a gazetted prison or a gazetted holding center?
In the first place, when they were taking me, I was taken to a prison.
Okay.
Then after alleging that I had a smartphone in my room.
They put you out.
After alleging that I had a smartphone in my room, that OP and ASP, they came to me and I was taken to a detention room.
Okay.
From there, before being taken to the detention room, I was punished, undressed. They caned me, humiliated me, degraded me, and took me under that cell, poured water inside it, and I was there for 2 weeks.
Okay.
That's what I went through.
And what did this experience mean? Were there explanations that were given to you for this sort of treatment? Of course, there is no explanation. That would be a welcome one. But, I mean, did they have to say anything while they were taking you through all this? And what did you perceive?
All what they were saying, that I had a smartphone.
Which you didn't have to have in a prison?
Yeah, because in a prison, like Luzira prisons, actually there are like 4 gates to reach where the inmates are.
Okay.
In that process, I even reached an extent of asking these officers that how did I maneuver, how did I really manage to get a smartphone and bypass all those gates to bring it in my room.
Okay.
They were like, for us, we were told that you had a smartphone in your room.
Maybe fast forward, after how long did you spend in that detention and how did you finally come out?
I spent there 2 weeks.
Okay.
And after those 2 weeks, I had to call someone that I know. I think after getting the information that I was also talking to some people, I was released from that detention.
How then were you talking to these people? In
that detention room, there is a small hall whereby you bend and talk to the people who are crossing there.
Or who are passing by.
Who are passing by.
Okay.
So in that process, I had a chance of getting someone whom I know. I was like, you know what? I may end up dying from here. Because the situation that I'm in is totally bad. I need to inform my people out there. He was like, how am I going to do it? I was like, call for me. There is a lady that used to serve us food. I told them to call for me that lady. The lady came. I had to talk to that lady to save my life.
Okay. And did you report after you were released? Did you report this case?
I did. Because I came out, it was in 2017,
okay.
Around 13th of June. I went to Naguru. I reported my case to Uganda Human Rights Commission. To date, my file has been there. I've been trying to follow it up, but justice has been delayed.
Okay. And you feel you're losing patience.
I'm losing patience.
Great that we have the Uganda Human Rights Commission representative here. And well, we will be talking to them in just a bit. But before I go to Ms. Ida from the Uganda Human Rights Commission, let me come to you, Ms. Irene, on the aspect of your experience as the Office of the DPP with regard to handling these cases of torture and prosecuting the torture-related cases. What has been your experience? What do you see in your day-to-day routines?
Thank you, Mildred. What I'd like to tell our viewers is the Office of the DPP is mandated to carry out prosecutions across the country. That is in all courts apart from the court-martial. And as you're aware, this law on torture was actually enacted in was actually enacted in 2012 and the cases have been slow. I can only put that to the fact that people were not sensitized enough, or the fact that people are slow to come out if they're experiencing torture. Okay. For us, in our statistics, we have very few cases, and I can also say that our prosecutors in our field stations have also been slow in actually prosecuting torture cases because, you know, we have the penal code, and the penal code is like the constitution of our cases as people who prosecute in the office of the DPP. And there are other similar offenses like maiming, assault. So prosecutors found it easier to actually prosecute people who maim others or who assault others. So as the office of the DPP, especially in the last 2 years, we've been embarking on the process of enlightening our prosecutors about the Torture Act. We've gone across the country. So far, we've gone to the west, that is Mbara, Kawali, and Masaka. And we've also invited police officers. So we've brought them to the attention. We've brought attention to the fact that the Torture Act exists, and like if they see any torturous acts, or if they even see their fellow people committing torture, especially the security officers, that they should open up a torture file instead of just covering it up as an assault or maiming. So far, we have been collecting statistics, but as you're aware, COVID came, so we've been slow in getting that, and also the courts are not working, so work has been slow. But at least I can assure the public that at least people are aware now, as they're also aware, as on social media, when you see a video circulating about some people beating up a child or some people being tortured, at least I can commend our security forces, especially the police, that in a few, hours or days, you see them apprehending someone. Okay. So at least this is coming to light, and I believe with this enlightenment, probably we shall see more torturous cases being brought forward and then also being prosecuted, so the message is sent.
All right, I will be coming back to, evidence gathering, which also applies to police, which is a sister in the jail sector. But let me come to you, Ms. Ida. We are in a COVID-19 pandemic. In the first lockdown alone, we had a number of cases, hundreds of cases that were reported. And while we're talking about torture, before we even look at the prosecution process and justice being accessed, because it's quite expensive, it takes a lot of time, but it also has its own implications. I would like us to look at the prevention, because they always say prevention is better than cure in any way. Let's look at the prevention mechanisms that can be adopted during this period of time, because you clearly can see that your work is quite tight, also getting from what Joachim had earlier said. But before we get to Joachim, tell us about some of those prevention mechanisms we could be dealing with, especially in such a lockdown period where staying together as family has seemed to be harder than many thought.
Thank you, Mildred. Torture is a vice that has been with us even before the lockdown, even before the pandemic. Yeah. And we've seen it rear its ugly head even during the pandemic and during the lockdowns. I would like to comment on the first lockdown, where we had directives, presidential directives that had to be enforced, and where we saw some use of excessive force by law enforcement and security agencies. So during the pandemic, the Uganda Human Rights Commission registered 124 complaints of torture. And this was out of a total of 308 cases of torture that were registered as a total in 2020. So that was quite a high figure. So preventive mechanisms during the pandemic. The pandemic has presented its challenges because as a commission, even with our stakeholders, we were coming up with quite a number of strategies to ensure that we prevent this vice of torture. Of course, one of which was to train. We were conducting trainings for the law enforcement and security agencies. And of course, these required physical interactions. But with COVID, with the pandemic, with the directives, we've had to come up with other mechanisms of ensuring that we continue to equip law enforcement and security agencies with knowledge, which knowledge we hoped that would be able to help them with their work to ensure that they do not violate the right freedom from torture. Right now, we are doing a lot of digital interactions. We do Zoom trainings. That's what the pandemic has now demanded of us. But what I wanted to highlight is that with trainings, you're targeting a change in attitude. And change in attitude takes time. We've been training law enforcement and security agencies since time immemorial, for all the years that the Commission has been in existence. So this is a strategy that we have to keep doing, or we have to step up our efforts, because change in attitude takes time. Another important area is ensuring accountability. When we have torture victims like Joachim, they would want to see justice being done.
Yes.
So justice being done includes holding perpetrators of torture accountable for their actions. So even with the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen court sitting, we've seen online court proceedings. So we would want to see more of these happening, because these are avenues through which perpetrators are held accountable. A perpetrator being held accountable is part of the justice process. So accountability is really, really very important. During the pandemic also, we would want to see a lot of mainstreaming of health services for victims of torture. Like I have mentioned, during the first lockdown, we had quite a number of cases of people being tortured as a result of enforcing the Ministry of Health directives. So victims of torture need to be able to access treatment, medical treatment, but not only that, to be able to access rehabilitation services. At the moment, we have the African Center for the Treatment of Torture Victims, Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims, that specifically handles torture victims. So when we say mainstreaming, is that we would want to see more of our health institutions handling cases of torture victims, documenting cases of torture victims, because then they'll be able to access these health institutions easily, not only have the option of ACTV, their nearest health center could be able to handle their case. Yes.
All right. And you actually talked about the issue of documentation. I want to start off from there exactly with Isaac Owana, who is the Assistant Superintendent of Police Legal. Now, I would like to find out from you on the aspect of documentation and effective investigation. How would you as police role, how would you say you have performed with regard to this issue? Because before a case is prosecuted, of course, there has to be evidence that is adducible before the courts of law. Afande Isaac?
Thank you, Mildred. Police as an institution really does not condone torture. And police officers from the word go, right from training, are taught not to use torture as a means of gathering evidence. But in respect to today's dialogue, which is documentation, it's first and foremost important to note that whereas the institution condemns torture in its totality, there are some incidents of torture. There are some instances of torture with the institution, but this should never be treated as institutional, this should not be treated as something condoned by the institution. We've got a lot of incidents which have been reported and have been investigated to their conclusion, and officers held accountable. and officers have been held accountable by the courts of law, because nowadays there is what is called individual responsibility. So any officer that takes part in torture will be individually held accountable. UPF has also come up with disciplinary mechanisms such as disciplinary courts, where officers have also been tried. If found guilty, they've been punished. And this has been a way of being accountable to the public, that police as an institution does not condone or promote torture, and torture is not a means of police work as a whole. Thank you.
Yes, SP Isaac, I would like to know, that is on the side of the officers, for example, who perpetrate torture. We would like to look at your investigation and documentation of the cases of torture from at least now the general public, away from what your officers actually go ahead to perpetrate.
Well, when cases are reported to police, for instance, a torture case, it is investigated and police reports are made. These are availed to the complainants or the public on request for a police report. So there are many cases that are reported, investigated, and concluded. However, we've not been able to bring them out to the public, because this is by way of a request for a police report. But once requested, police reports are always availed and responses given in respect to such instances of torture.
Easy is it for you to document and even investigate these cases of torture? Because many a times people are not even willing to come out, or they do not want to speak out. So how easy does it become for you to get the information and all that evidence, or they report late at the end of the day, the evidence that you will need to use and pass on to the DPP?
Well, it is not something so easy, but the officers are trained on what to look for, the questions to look for when for instance, getting statements, interviewing someone. They have those W's. They are those questions they are looking for, which kind of guide them towards torture, because there are particular ingredients to be fulfilled in torture. So the investigators go to investigate with such questions. However, we find problems that some people fear that they'll be gone after if they give evidence. But we've tried to work with institutions such as the Uganda Human Rights, where these people feel free to report to them and give them information, which information we use to help us gather more evidence as officers, to help us handle the matters to their logical conclusion.
All right, thank you very much. ASP will be coming back to you. On the aspect of reporting, I want to come to you, Mr. Wamani Joachim.
Yes.
How did you report your case? How easy was it for you to prove that you were tortured because you're out of a detention facility? Did you immediately go? And how easy has it been? Probably evidence gathering is one of the reasons that your case is still in the Uganda Human Rights Commission. Take us through.
In the first place, when I'd just gotten out of the prison, I went to SCTV for, torture. It is a rehabilitation center for torture victims. I went there. I was being treated by those people, by Dr. Alex. From there, I had to come back to Uganda Human Rights Commission with evidence, because my file, I provided everything in the file.
What do you mean everything? Did you have like pictorials? Because
the
you
evidence, the scars that I had, the damage that I had at that time, because I was totally mistreated and I was mentally disturbed and physically disturbed. I went to Human Rights and I reported the case. To date, justice has been delayed.
Okay. From 2017 to 2021 currently. Let me actually now ask Ms. Ida, who is also the Director of Complaints, Investigations and Legal Services at the Uganda Human Rights Commission. One, it is clear that there is fear. There is a stigma sort of for people to come and report aspects of torture. But also that is coupled with the fact that we do not have a witness protection law. So many people are fearing, if I report Joachim, what if he comes for me next? How will I be protected at the end of the day? Let's talk about dealing with this stigma and why how you think it can actually be addressed.
Okay. Before I get to that, Mildred, allow me to quickly address
Joachim's complaint.
Yes.
Yes.
Joachim reported to the Commission in 2017, and I assume he was referred by ACTV.
ACTV,
Yes,
right. Yeah.
we work very closely with ACTV. We refer complainants to ACTV for treatment. ACTV also refers its patients to us for their cases to be registered and eventually heard by the Commission's tribunal. So 2017, that means he got the treatment from ACTV.
Right.
They gave him his report, which he brought to the Commission. The Commission conducted its investigation, recorded all the prerequisite statements required from himself and his witnesses, if he had any. In 2019, we unfortunately suffered a setback. Our chairperson passed away, and the Constitution provides under Article 51 that the Commission shall be comprised of a chairperson and at least 3 members. So in the absence of a chairperson, the Commission is not fully and legally constituted. And this has affected a number of key processes, including the conducting of our tribunal. Because of the legal nature of our tribunal, with the Commission not being fully and legally constituted, the tribunal cannot sit.
Okay.
So Joachim's case is one of those cases that has suffered as a result of this.
But Ms. Ida, someone out there is thinking, Joachim reports, he said he left the detention facility around June 2017. And 2019, particularly to say it was 20th November, unfortunately, in 2019, is when we lost Mr. Medikagwa, the then chairperson, may he so rest in peace. Those are clearly about 2 years, and still his case hadn't been handled.
Yes, you have to know that it takes time to collect evidence. Sometimes the evidence is there, sometimes you have to hunt for it.
Okay.
But also, we have a first in, first out policy, whereby we have older cases that we are also handling in our system. Joachim's complaint added itself onto those. So that explains the time lag in handling Joachim's case. But we are very hopeful that in the near future or in a short time, His Excellency will be appointing a chairperson, and we are going to hit the ground running in as far as the cases scheduled before our tribunal are concerned, because they've been lying redundant for quite some time.
Okay.
So that has affected access to justice for our complainants.
All right, maybe before you actually also go to the aspect of people failing to report or fearing to report, when we talk about the judiciary and the jail sector, we're talking about backlogged cases. About how many cases do you have in the Uganda Human Rights Commission currently on average, since you said you deal with a first in, first out kind of basis?
At the tribunal level, we have 1,000 cases.
Wow.
Yes. We have 1,000 cases awaiting hearing. Our cases are heard by members of the commission who are also appointed by the president. So, and they are heard in all our regional offices. We have 10 of them. So depending on the number of hearing commissioners, that would determine the pace at which we handle those cases. But because of the various challenges we've kept facing over the years, including having a commission which is not fully constituted, it has affected the pace at which we handle these cases. Yes.
Let's now go to the aspect. Are you putting in place mechanisms? 1,000 cases before your tribunal may seem huge, but that's only a drop in the ocean, because There are so many people who just either give up on reporting or are very scared because they're not sure that as a witness, I will be protected, or at the end of the day as well.
Yes. People fear reprisals. People who have gone through torture, first of all, you have to remember that they are traumatized by the experience they went through, but also fear that if they come and report, the people who arrested and tortured them will come after them.
Okay.
So we've faced a challenge that we do not have a witness protection law in place, as you earlier mentioned, but we are part of a coalition group, the Uganda Human Rights Commission, that is really pressing for the passing of this law, because this law is going to provide a framework or a structure within which witnesses are going to be protected. However, as a commission, when people come and report cases to us, and we indeed register these cases, it then becomes our responsibility to ensure that they are protected. We encourage them, if they face any reprisals, to immediately inform us. And then we use our networks, both within the law enforcement and security agencies, to ensure that these people are secured. Okay. So that's the strategy we are using. When they come and report to us, we have to make it alive to them. We have to make it clear to them about the risks involved in reporting a case.
And that's where the problem is. You
Yes.
tell me the risks, I give up.
No, but we assure them that we are now with them in this journey. That they've started by coming to register their case with the commission.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Miss Irina Chimbugwe, I want to come to you. Earlier on, while speaking about how you've handled, or your experience of handling these cases of torture, there seem to be some grim areas. There seem to be some challenges that you are grappling with as the office of the DPP. Some seemed structural, and others actually did seem very, very practical. What are some of these challenges that you are facing in execution of your work?
Thank you. I think I'll begin with the structural. As you're aware, the office of the DPP is, we can only direct police to carry out investigations. We cannot go to the scene and collect the evidence ourselves. So in there lies the problem. As per the Uganda Human Rights Commission reports, so far, the ones at least have been able to come across, they always claim that the security agencies are the main perpetrators of torture.
And then you're sending them to actually investigate a torture
Exactly.
case.
So yes, you report to us, we have to send you back to the police to collect information. So how feasible is it that my colleagues in the police have been accused of torture, and then I'll go ahead and, you know, open up a file and investigate them? So in there lies the structural really difficulty. And still, we always wait for the files to come from police. So even though someone is tortured, they'll definitely come and maybe report to us, but we'll still refer them back to police. So we rarely get very many cases concerning torture. So other challenges, as you're aware, we have no witness protection law. People come and report, but they're not sure of their security. So I think when they weigh the good elements vis-a-vis what will happen to you in case you report a security person who has tortured you against your family, all those things, I think they come into hand and into play, and we end up getting very few people who report torture cases. As I said, it's also difficult. You know, we can get on social media a number of people who have been tortured. You see the marks on their bodies and all that. But remember, if you've been tortured and then you are blindfolded, and then on collecting evidence, you don't even actually know who
exactly. You can't even tell who.
Exactly. Yeah. So how will your file look like in case we are to prosecute? How will your file look like? Because you'll have no particular face to it. You probably know a voice, but like you can't put a name to the voice. So those are the challenges when we go to court. A case can look very good on social media, but like when you go to court, remember we are evidence-based.
Sure.
Yeah, so the evidence that you're going to rely on, where will it come from? How will you notify? How will you, give credible evidence to the judge for them to come out and say, yes, this particular person actually tortured a person. So there we end up not having so many cases that can be taken to court, and then we end up having very few statistics on torture-related cases.
Looking at these structural changes, do you suggest anything? Have you thought about anything as the office of the DPP? Because if you have to sit and wait while you've instructed, there are many, many other things that the police has to do. It is actually charged with ensuring that there is law and order, so they're attending to riots, they're doing this. There is a lot of work. Have you thought about some ideas, and how would you want some of these structural challenges to actually be addressed?
I can only say, you know, you cannot be the judge and the jury in your file, in your case.
Oh, yeah.
Because we can't go out there and collect evidence at the same time. We are the ones to
continue with the case.
Or we can't be the complainants. You know, someone reports to me, but because they fear to be victimized, they come and tell me. I can't be the one to relay that information to the judges as well. So there, I don't know, it has to really be thought out whether we need a separate body to look into torture victims. We can partner with, I think, Uganda Human Rights Commission, the cases they do, because for them, they really look at people to be compensated for the torture they went through, the mental anguish and all that. It's really about compensation.
Okay.
So they don't look at the criminal element out of it. So if their cases actually are concluded, they can probably refer some of them which they think are criminal in nature for us to take on and prosecute the persons that they...
Have you, in your execution of duty, envisaged a conflict of interest? Because at the end of the day still, this is a case of one of your colleagues in the jail sector. Exactly. And then you either have to send them to investigate the case, but it is them who actually are being investigated at the end of the day. Have you experienced such, and how do you think in the near future it can be handled still? How complex?
Yeah, we've experienced those ones. As people are also aware, during the election violence, there were all cases of torture. They circulated on social media. And yes, people can bring complaints, but still we have to take them back to the very police officers too. So I don't know how that can be handled. I think the best is if our colleagues in human rights actually do succeed in carrying out those investigations and coming up with evidence, because I believe for them they're a bit independent. I don't know how they carry out their evidence or investigations, but they do come up with documentation, and probably we can rely on that documentation because we will think it will not be biased in a certain way.
Okay.
Yeah, and then basing on that, we can also take on the cases on the criminal element that is arising from the criminal torture that was reported to the Human Rights Commission.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Irene. Now, I will get back to you, ASP Isaac. You talked about the fact that now there is personal liability and you've gone ahead to prosecute some of your very own. But what seems to come out is that you seem to prefer more administrative sanctions than actually going through an official court process. And that is what to the public seems to be irking them, and they're asking, why do you want to give them administrative sanctions? Why don't you take them through a court process and let them be handled? Because no one is above the law.
Okay, well, for the court process, police can't do it alone, like the former discussant has highlighted. We do it hand in hand with DPP, because most of these torture cases end up being criminal cases. So what police does is gather the evidence, have a file compiled and forward to DPP for possible sanctioning or guidance on how we can proceed. So police says there's nothing that we can protect our own if they are found to have breached what is required. So if we find that a police officer has participated in torture, an investigator will be put in place. The case will first and foremost be reported to a police station, have a reference, which reference is normally given to a complainant. Thereafter, investigations will start with an independent investigating officer who will compile the file, have it forwarded to DPP. So DPP comes in as a second institution. DPP will also not have the same bias. If they find the evidence is sufficient, they will have the file sanctioned, and this person will be taken to court, whether the person is a police officer or a civilian. Mildred.
Yes, SP Isaac, you have answered it partly, but before we went to personal liability, the discussion was always order from above. That's a statement that always came through. Now you have gone to personal liability, that an order can be given, but if you see that it's against, the rules of justice, you could go against it. We've seemingly seen the low-ranking, what many people call the small fish, low-ranking officers being sanctioned, and yet those in the case that I did take on an order and executed it and it's against the law, you give me sanctions, but the person who is superior to me is not taken in.
Well, these officers are trained right from the initial training in the training school. Not every order given is lawful. You're supposed to weigh out from the training you're taught what police work is, what you're required to do. So you can tell what is lawful and what is unlawful. If you choose to take an unlawful order, then you have to bring evidence that indeed it was given. Otherwise, it will remain a claim that it was an order from my superior. But if you cannot bring this evidence, it is hard to prove. And most of these unlawful orders are verbal. They are not written.
Maybe still in that particular case, it's an unlawful order. I am a junior, my superior gives an order, verbal, whichever way it is, and I go against it. And then, because it's not executed, I am trying to play the devil's advocate. I am accused of insubordination. How do you deal with such?
Insubordination, it is, we have courts, because insubordination is a disciplinary case. And before the matter is taken there, the file is first perused. We have our in-house kind of DPP, people who will peruse these files and say, yes, the evidence is enough for insubordination, or it is not enough, have the officer clear, there is no case. So insubordination will not stand if the order given was unlawful.
All right, thank you very much, ASP Isaac Owana. I'll definitely be coming back to you. The conversation is actually getting more and more interesting as we, on this day, June 26th, do get to commemorate the International Day in support of victims of torture. And we're clearly, as per the theme of this particular year, we're talking to supporting the torture victims, I mean survivors, to report and access justice, because the numbers seem low of people who are continuously coming through. Let's take a very short break, and when we do return, we continue with this conversation.
As Uganda joins the world to commemorate the United Nations Day in support of victims of torture on Saturday, 26th of June, this year, we call upon the public to exercise their duty of reporting all acts of torture and ill treatment in time to enable professional documentation and investigation which will aid the processes of access to justice for the victims. We will mark this day with an e-public dialogue under the theme Support Torture Survivors to Report and Access Justice, which will broadcast live on NBS TV from 4 to 6 p.m. This message is brought to you by the Uganda Human Rights Commission and the Coalition Against Torture in Uganda, with support from Germany-Ugandan Development Corporation, GIZ, #Justice for Torture Survivors.
Hey, now that's hitting the right notes. When life gets boring, we bring out our play. You see, playfulness is in our DNA. It's in the way we move and laugh. It's in the way we walk, the way we rock, and how we just don't stop. You feel me? We add color to everything, to every day and every dish, because the world needs our crazy. We're the different flavors that make life more exciting. We're the ones who add color to every moment. Fanta, color every moment.
Therefore, understanding this model. Excuse me, lady. Who do you think you are? A queen?
Hey, haven't you heard? Get Airtel Chillax bundles and browse like a queen.
Get Airtel Chillax bundles that do not expire and browse like a queen or king. Dial *175# or use My Airtel app. Airtel, the smartphone network.
Introducing AfriCell Sabuda Bando. Dial *134#. Pick a bundle for as low as 5,000 shillings and get 1 GB, 25 minutes to call other networks, and 25 minutes for AfriCell calls. Don't just load Bando for Sabuda Bando. AfriCell, connecting communities. AfriCell is regulated by Ghana Communications Commission.
Today tastes like a new tradition, like an old favorite. Tastes like all hands on deck and all eyes on the prize. Today tastes like a piece of the action. And it never tasted this good.
It's a free header! Goal!
And it's in the back of the net from Robert Lewandowski. Because that is... Got a cross!
Onoonya omupiira ogukyasinze okunyuma, ebifo eby'okumwanjo okunyumirwa buli kimu, okwenyigira mu mboozi n'okwegatta mu kkubo olwali, owagira Ronaldo, Hazard, Sterling, okulaba obubadde obusingayo n'ekifaananyi ekiri ku mutindo. Bakafulu mu kugwogerera ng'onyumirwa Euro 2020. Jangu onyumirwe ng'olaba UEFA Euro 2020 live ku Supersport okuva nga 11 June paka nga 11 July. Go TV, love it. Obubaka buno bukutuusibwako Bet King, Playground for Kings.
Straight to your living room will bring you Watoto Church on air with uplifting worship and an enriching word of God in this season. Tune in to NBS Television every Sunday at 9 a.m. for the children and youth services and at 10 a.m. for the main service. Let's stand together as we learn how to thrive in these tough times.
UEFA Euro 2020, Europe's grandest football championship with Europe's grandest players. Like him, and them. But with SuperSport and DSTV, it's also all about you. It's for the big preppers.
Starting! We welcome you to the Stade de Nice.
And the die-hard jersey wearers.
Ronaldo! It's a second.
The sore losers and the sore winners. It's for those who watch it together and those who watch it on the go. It's not about where it's played, but how it's played. And when it's played on a stage this big by players this intense, it's anyone's game. Get and stay connected to DSTV to watch UEFA Euro 2020 on dedicated SuperSport channels. This broadcast is proudly brought to you by Betway.
As Uganda joins the world to commemorate the United Nations Day in support of victims of torture on Saturday, 26th of June this year, we call upon the public to exercise their duty of reporting all acts of torture and ill treatment in time to enable professional documentation and investigation which will aid the processes of access to justice for the victims. We will mark this day with an e-public dialogue under the theme Support Torture Survivors to Report and Access Justice, which will broadcast live on NBS TV from 4 to 6 p.m. This message is brought to you by the Uganda Human Rights Commission and the Coalition Against Torture in Uganda with support from Germany-Ugandan Development Corporation, GIZ, #Justice for Torture Survivors.
All right, welcome back from that short commercial break, and thank you so much for staying with us. Those who are joining us online, thank you very much as we continue to commemorate today the International Day of torture victims and supporting them to access justice, but also to be able to report, because such vices need to come to an end. There needs to be examples of prosecutions that have been taken on up to the end to ensure that this can deter any others who would want to perpetrate acts of torture and ill treatment. Coming back to you, Mr. Wamani Joachim, you said up to now you feel justice has delayed and you feel like you're literally almost giving up, but you still want to push on. To you, torture survivors' view, what would you consider your justice to be? And when you reported this case, what is your real intention? What do you want to gain out of this case being prosecuted and taken on?
The whole main thing was to get justice out of it. Because, at times, there are so many people out there who are being tortured and they have no access to report torture cases.
Okay.
You find a person is traumatized, is mentally disturbed. That very person needs to be rehabilitated or taken to a rehabilitation center for help, for treat and help.
Which SCTV is trying to do right now.
Yeah. Because actually it was SCTV that worked on me at that time. I'd lost my mind totally. Because in those 2 weeks, when I was in those detention, what I used to go through, I can't even explain it here. Because the nightmares, all those things, a lot of things. I'm imagining to what I went through and the people out there who are suffering, not knowing the law out there. The people who are out there, they don't know where to report, ability to access justice. I'm just feeling empathy for those people who can't access justice.
But when you say justice in your own case, what would justice look like to you? At what point in time, what things do you need to happen for you to say, I've gotten my justice served?
At least I want those perpetrators to be brought to book. And they also face that, at least a fair judgment.
All right.
That's what I want to get.
Okay, and that is yet to come through. Well, we are praying that that will be coming through pretty soon. Let me go to ASP Isaac Wana, who is online. I come back to you, ASP, and in this particular case, of course, there were lots of excuses that would come through with prosecution of torture victims. One being that we did not have a law. We had the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act coming through. Secondly, we said in that case there was that you couldn't implement this law without clear guidelines. Then came in the 2017 regulations to the law against torture that are now in place. And when you look at this, particularly these regulations, the spirit behind them and the spirit behind passing them was to actually look at effective investigation and professional documentation of torture in the pursuit of justice. The question is, are they being implemented? And if not, what is the problem?
We are trying to have the 2017 regulations implemented. However, it is not 100% being implemented. Reason being, there are gaps that are created. One being that for us to effectively implement the 2017 regulations, we need assistance from the public. But you find that you have a public which does not know their rights. They do not know about the regulations. They do not know about the anti-torture. And this becomes a big gap to us as police to enforce. because someone will come and make a report, but they do not know that it's their right to follow up that complaint. They think having a report made is sufficient, despite several endeavors from officers asking them to come and assist in investigations, give us guidance, as because as police we shall investigate, forward the fight to DPP, who will ask us to go back and have further investigations done in particular areas. But when you contact a person who complained, the person is not willing to come. They say, I already made my complaint. I want it handled to its logical conclusion, without them coming on board to assist. That's one gap that we've had in fulfilling our mandate as police in line with the torture. Another gap is limited knowledge about the law. People do not know about their rights against torture. They think if anyone in uniform, once they arrest you in any way, it is a right way of arrest. We've tried to curb this gap by carrying out sensitization to the public and telling them about police work, how it's done, and that we are also not above the law. If an officer in uniform goes beyond what he's supposed to do, they are culpable. Then one big gap we are having is the bad perspective of the public towards police. Because of what we see on social media, you find the public also really going against police officers, and it becomes so hard for an officer. They'll go out of their way and use some bit of force to have such person brought to book. That's all, Mildred, I can submit for now, unless there is clarity.
Come to you to some of the issues you've actually talked about. You talk about needing assistance from the public. What sort of assistance do you want? And yet you're saying you're dealing with a public that does not understand their rights. How have you helped to bridge that gap, that as a citizen, I know my rights, and in the interaction with the security forces, I am able to help?
Well, we've carried out sensitizations. We move around the country to the different police regions where we meet the public and sensitize them. We have what is called community policing, where officers move to the public and show them that we are there, we are accountable to them. This is a job that is given to us by the public. We are there to ensure that human rights are enforced. So we try to sensitize them and tell them about their rights, how police is supposed to work, which is a way of accounting. Then the other question of assistance, the assistance we require is we need the public to help us, lead us to where these incidences of torture have occurred. For instance, a scene of crime is very important during investigations. We cannot lead ourselves there. We need the public, those who were around. We need witnesses. Without witnesses, a case is not good. So that's the assistance we need, is that witnesses, people who can guide us, help us answer the questions that are being answered in a particular investigation in respect to torture.
Second one, before I get to Ms. Irina Chimbugwe here from the Office of the DPP, you talked about the public perspective towards you, the attitude the public has towards police. This has existed for quite a long period of time, and I'm asking myself, what mechanisms are you putting in place to ensure that you clean up this image? Because the reports have always talked about police, the public is angry against the police. What are you doing about it?
Well, what we are doing is we are trying to be accountable to the public by showing that errant officers are brought to book, whether through criminal courts, where we cannot achieve them going through the criminal court. We ensure that the public sees that police is not sitting and protecting perpetrators. We are taking them through disciplinary courts, and some have been dismissed. Others have been given punishments. There are several punishments under the Police Act that the courts, the disciplinary courts, can give to any errant officer who goes out of book. that's a way that we are trying to show the public that as police, we do not have any bad intentions. We just have a few rotten apples and we are trying to deal with them. That's all I can submit for now on that.
Thank you very much, ASP Isaac. I totally agree. It's an uphill task. There is a lot that needs to be done, and that's on a daily. Ms. Irina Chimbugwe, from the Office of the DPP, and I want to still speak to the 2017 regulations forms because they're intended to look at effective investigation and then professional documentation of torture acts with regard to accessing justice. What do you think is undermining their utilization?
What I can say, I think it is sensitization.
Okay.
It's very crucial. These laws are put in place. We welcome them. They're very good because they are going to enable us achieve our mandate. But most of the people don't know exactly. As my colleague Isaac from police has just alluded to, people don't know their rights. If they torture you, like where should you go first? Whom should you run to report? Yeah, and when you report, like, what are the things you should be looking out for? It's not a matter of just going to the police and say, I've been tortured, that man there, you grab him. And there is some documentation that goes into it. So you sit down, you make your statement. And remember, you are the victim. So you have to lead us to other witnesses. As I said, court needs evidence. It's not a one-man's show that I was tortured. You go to court and tell the judge that I was tortured. They will ask you, who are the people who saw? Who was there? What time was it? What was your first response? Where did you go to? All that needs to be gathered because, as I said, as prosecutors rely on the law to prosecute cases, and these cases must have elements. Elements need a witness who was there. If there is any documentation, yes, you were tortured, you need a medical report. It's not a matter of just saying that I have a wound and this wound actually emanated from the torture that I was subjected to by the security officers. This has to be documented by a surgeon, a police surgeon. So you see, all that within the law is supposed to be put together, and it takes time. It's a process. So we need to sensitize the security officers about these particular forms, how to fill them in, what to look out for. The public as well needs to know that when you're tortured, this is what you're supposed to avail to the police so that the police can help you and also the prosecution can help you and your cases are properly prosecuted before the courts of law for you to get justice as they want justice. Also, it's not a matter of only training security officers, also our people from the office of the DPP need, because, filling in a form takes some time. You have to be in a mental,
right mental state.
Exactly. So for you to fill in the form, to go slowly with the victim, sometimes they're traumatized. You have to take all that into consideration. Someone was tortured, their mental anguish is still high up there, and yet you want them to sit down and fill a form, and probably they want to go, so you have to be very patient with them, fill the forms, get documentation, put it together, and to add that to the final one, for the magistrates and the judges who take these particular documentation forms, they also need to be based on what exactly is to be expected from there. It's not a matter of like just saying, yes, I will tender it in and then I'll follow it. You have to take the judge or the magistrate through, and they have to also follow the chronology of events as they occurred. It's not a matter of just tendering in the form. So they have to also be at par with everyone who has filled in that form, what is expected from that form. So it is, I think, to me, it is really sensitization of the masses, the security people, the people who are the end users of these forms, as well as the final persons who give the sentences to the torture perpetrators.
Okay, still talking about these forms, one of the biggest challenges in many of Uganda's laws or documentations is that we write them in English because that's our colonial master's language. Now, this is a form that has to be filled by my grandmother, probably in Masindi, in the village, and they literally know nothing about the entire questionnaire, which is in English. And probably also the officers who are dealing with these people are not patient enough to even go ahead and either explain them, or there is a bit of a language barrier. Have we tried, or how much better can we deal with these? Because I want to believe these are English questionnaires.
Yes, one thing for sure is that the language of court is English. So we can't really run away from it. You can't feel it in your vernacular. And
can't we deal with, you know, having to translate them like we've seen a translation of a constitution?
Yes, they do, because there are some people who actually make confessions and they're made in their vernacular, but then they're translated. It has to be translated because court cannot take in a document which is in vernacular. It has to be translated back into English. So that's what I say, that it needs patience. You have to go with someone who understands the language to understand exactly what the victim is talking about. And then after listening to that, you translate it in English. Then you have to read it back to them. So they say, this is exactly what I meant when I said in my statement that I was tortured. That is the process, I say, which needs a lot of patience, and people who are trained to actually be very patient with the people who are victims of torture.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, Ms. Irina Nachimbugwe. And Mr. Robert Kochani from the UN Human Rights Commission Office actually wants to speak to us, and also with regard to the discussion that we are having right now. It's an interesting one, but very delicate at the end of the day. Mr. Kochani, over to you.
Thank you so much. And once again, thanks to the panelists. I've been listening very carefully to the statement that has been made by all those speaking. And I wanted to come in at this stage regarding the issue of torture, which is a global one. It's not only about Uganda, even developed countries, the so-called big democracies, do face cases of torture. The only problem is the answer that is given to cases of torture, which may differ depending on whether you condone impunity or whether you foster or fight against impunity. So I think for Uganda, there's something which has not come out clearly, the responsibility of police officers, because the UN Human Rights Office, together with the Uganda Human Rights Commission, and by the way, the police themselves, we have been training police extensively in this country, as Ida has said. Unfortunately, until now, some police officers, including at a high level, meaning DPCs, do believe that by torturing, they wouldn't say the word like that, but they will say that but in any case, it comes to torture, and by touching people, by forcing people, by exercising some force on people, you can get some results. Some of them do believe, it's not the majority, but we come across during capacity building activities that some of them do believe that it's something you can still do if that will guarantee a certain level of result. Whereas the laws are clear that any evidence gathered on the torture is void and null. It can only be used against the alleged perpetrator of the torture. And I think much as Uganda has to be commended, because Uganda went steps ahead. For example, Article 1 of the Convention Against Torture makes it, among other, compulsory for the alleged perpetrator to be a state agent, or at least somebody who has some relationship with the state. But Uganda has gone further by saying that even individual civilians can be accused of torture. What is the difference between torture and assault, for example? It's about the severity of the sanction that will be administered to the perpetrator if found guilty. So I think, much as my friend and colleagues from police, Isaac, said that the community is not well educated, I fully agree, and we need to escalate effort on that. I think we should also continue sensitizing even police officers themselves, because as I said at the beginning, some of them do believe that it's possible to get some results if you exercise some torture, whereas there should be zero tolerance for torture, be it under the Convention Against Torture, which Uganda is the signatory of, or with under relevant conventions of relevant instruments of local domestic legislation, including the Constitution itself, which clearly prohibits the use of torture. So I think sensitization has to continue both for the community and for the police, and exemplary sentences have to be given to perpetrators of torture. That's one of the ways whereby I think we can deter anybody who would want to engage into that. I rest my case for now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robert Kochani, who is the country representative, UN Human Rights. And now let me come to you, Ms. Ida Nachiganda. Earlier on, we talked about, because when it is justice, some are seeking prosecution of the people who perpetrated torture against them. Others are actually seeking for compensation. But there is a journey between the award itself of compensation and receipt of the money, because currently the amount seems to be about over 5 billion Ugandan shillings. Where does your mandate as Uganda Human Rights Commission start and stop? And why does it seem to be exactly this? Where is the problem? That the money, the court declares, or whatever the process is, I'm given my 50 million, 10 million, and it takes me forever to actually get this money.
So the Uganda Human Rights Commission, once it has conducted the investigation and forwarded the case to the tribunal, and the case is heard by the tribunal and determined that indeed a human right was violated, the tribunal will order for compensation to be paid.
Okay.
We have the principle of vicarious liability. Most of the respondents in our cases are government institutions. So the compensation is paid by, or was paid then by the Ministry of Justice or the Attorney General's chambers. So once the tribunal has made the compensation order, then these orders are referred to the Ministry of Justice for payment, just like it is done in the courts of law. So there's always been a challenge of having these compensation awards paid because of...
In simpler terms, third party paying becomes an issue.
I'll come to the third party paying. At this point, I'm discussing where the Attorney General, the government, is paying. We've had a challenge with that payments being realized because of a backlog of payments that have to be made. Remember that the Commission's compensation orders are also in line with the orders made by the ordinary courts of law.
Yes.
So that has always been a challenge. However, I need to point out that in the year 2020, the Ministry of Justice paid out 3.5 billion in compensation awards to victims of human rights violations, including victims of torture. And that was a step in the right direction.
Okay.
But also something else I need to point out is that effective 1st July 2015, there was what is called the decentralization of payment of court and tribunal awards. So when I started this discussion, I mentioned vicarious liability and the fact that it was the Ministry of Justice and the Attorney General paying. But now, effective 1st July 2015, government decentralized the payment of court awards, meaning that it's now individual institutions like police, like the UPDF, like prisons that now have to bear the burden of paying this award. There is no more hiding behind the Attorney General. And what this means is that the individual specific budgets of these institutions are now being affected by the acts of their officers. The decentralization of court awards, I think, was put in place as a deterrent, that when institutions see that a big chunk of their budgets is going towards compensating victims of human rights violations, then they'll have to prevail on their officers to respect human rights in the execution of their work. We've started seeing some challenges, though, in the payment of these awards by the individual institutions, especially where they say that they don't have the budgets for paying these awards. But we are continuing to engage to ensure that victims of human rights violations access their compensation awards in a timely manner. A delay in paying compensation adds trauma to the victim who is already suffering the trauma for the action that they suffered. Now you're delaying to pay them. Delaying compensation does not necessarily rub away the experience that they went through, but is a step towards them trying to build, trying to build a new life, trying to come to terms with what they experienced.
Are we thinking about probably away from just, you're saying police or prisons or whichever, for example, if it's an agency of government, but since we are talking about personal liability now, are we thinking in the direction of if it is Officer Mildred who perpetrated this act of torture and there is a compensation award that has been given, it should be Mildred. If it means attaching her property, it should be her to pay.
That's a very good question, Mildred. The Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act, 2012, as well as the Human Rights Enforcement Act, 2019. These are the two laws now that are quite important in the enforcement of human rights, have provided for individual liability. As a police officer, as an army officer, as a prisons officer, you are now going to be held individually liable for your actions. And we've now seen courts progressively having decisions whereby they are ordering police officers to pay from their pockets victims of human rights violations. Even at the Commission, we are seeing compensation orders. It's now called apportioning liability, whereby the institution will pay a particular percentage, and then the private individual will also pay a particular percentage. All of these are meant to be deterrents for any other officers out there in the field, that when I am engaged or involved in an act of a human rights violation, I'm going to feel it in my pocket. And there's been a cry that most of them are poorly paid. So when is the victim going to realize that award? But I think we have to look at the bigger picture, and the bigger picture is prevention, deterrence.
Yes.
And for these police officers, these army officers, prisons officers, or government officials to think twice before they go ahead to violate any human right.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Amani Joachim, what do you think needs to be done to support survivors of torture to report, but also be able to access justice at the end of the day?
Thank you, Mildred. They need to be rehabilitated and getting treatment, and help them, guide them, not to lose, to learn how to be resilient, and
And in this resilience, you're talking about that point in time where some of the survivors actually want to give up, and yet
they want to give up on the case.
Still continuing.
Justice is being delayed, and the survivor wants to give up. He's seeing that the case has been delayed, justice has been denied to him or her. They find it hard, really.
Okay.
And remember, at that time they're going through trauma. They're mentally disturbed.
I also want to ask you, how accessible is justice in Uganda, at least in your own perspective as well? How do you find accessing justice, the entire process?
Here in Uganda, it is very difficult to access justice. Very difficult.
Where are the difficulties?
Because, like I told you in the first place, that I reported my case in 2017.
Yes.
To date, justice has never prevailed.
Okay. So apart from the delay itself, do you think that any other impediments to this access to justice? Because yes, there might be a delay, but we are optimistic probably at some point in time there might be light at the end of the tunnel. But away from just the delay, because like Ms. Ida did particularly say, there are lots of cases that are all as well waiting. And it also, while you're saying yours is in 2017, someone may have entered in 2015 or even earlier than that. So apart from the delay, what other challenge do you look at with regard to accessing justice?
Other challenges.
Are there any cost implications?
Like now, me, I was tortured and I've been treating myself ever since then. I've been treating myself because I went to SCTV, they did their part. Finally, my health situation went deteriorating. I had to put in to treat myself. To date, I'm still treating myself.
Okay, because some of these injuries are long term.
Yeah.
Okay, Ms. Irene Nachimbugwe, in your view as well, what do you think needs to be done to support these torture survivors to deal with the situation, and that's both either to report but also to be able to access justice?
I can only say There are mechanisms in place. For instance, we at the office of the DPP, we have a complaints desk.
Okay.
So when you feel tortured, please just don't stay there, as they say. Especially in criminal, we have no limitations to criminal cases. Just keep your documentation. It can take 10 years, but probably, yes, justice is delayed, but probably it will never be denied. At a certain point in time, you'll get justice. So just keep your documentation. Come to the office of the DPP. We sit on Workers' House, 11th floor and 12th floor. Just tell us, because we work in partnership with other institutions. We can refer you to Human Rights Commission. I'm just saying DPP as the starting point, because we don't in itself end everyone's whatever. There are ailments, or we don't compensate, we don't give money. But like if you feel you've been tortured and you want an entry point into the system, so you just come to our offices, 12th floor. We can direct you to the Human Rights Commission in case you're interested in compensation because of the torturous acts that you received from any person, be it a normal individual or security agencies. We can also refer you to SCTV for those who need extra social psycho support and all those things. So please, I can only call upon people, don't sit by if you're tortured. For instance, in these last, I think, elections, we also called out people who felt that they were tortured to come and make complaints at our offices. As per now, we did not receive anything. So I just want people...
And what do you think would have been the issue? Fear, trust issues, experiences? Did you try to find out why? Probably even with the announcement of, come and report. Everyone seems to be laid back.
I don't know exactly what happened, because we didn't probably come out on TV to call up people. Okay. But we went through other institutions. We went to the Law Society. Law Society represents lawyers who actually get in touch with their clients. We told them, in case you get any report concerning disappearances of people, people who are tortured, just forward them to the office of the DPP. We shall handle them. We did not receive any report. Okay. We also we are also now trying to partner with SCTV in case they have any tortured victims that they think we can handle in a certain way. Probably the perpetrators are security agencies where we can direct police to carry out investigations. We are also waiting for those reports. So I just want to call out to the public that in case you feel you're being tortured, or you just keep your documentation, because remember, you are the witness who will give this evidence in court. Keep your documentation, just approach our offices, we shall direct you to the relevant officers.
All right. SP Isaac, also coming back to you, I would like to ask the same question. What do you think needs to be done to support these torture survivors to not only report but access justice? Or I could also flip it to what you are doing as a Uganda Police Force to ensure that this comes to pass.
Thank you, Mildred. I'll have to re-echo what Irene has said. What these survivors should do is have their documentation. From the time the complaint is made, have the reference of your case recorded, have it documented somewhere. Everything that happens, let it be documented. If you get a court award, have it protected, because that is what is going to help you get money. As police, we've been affected by the decentralization of payments of these court awards. We've paid to a tune of 2 billion, and more are still being paid. But all this is paid on the basis of a court award. Once the court says pay so and so such and such an amount, it may not be instant because of the backlog of cases, but it will eventually happen. So what the victims should do is have their documentation kept, protected, until the time they realize the fruits of their court awards.
ASP Isaac Owana, I will be coming back to you in just a bit. Let me come to you, Ms. Ida Nachiganda. You earlier on talked about the lack of a substantive chairman of the Uganda Human Rights Commission, which is affecting your constitutional mandate of dealing with issues of torture. But so now, what are you able to do in the case that the president hasn't as yet appointed chairperson, what are you doing? What can the, because torture is going on, it's not waiting for a chairman to come through.
We are documenting. We continue to receive complaints, and we document them. We are investigating because we have a mandate to receive, investigate, and resolve complaints of human rights violations. So we are receiving and registering these complaints. We are investigating these complaints, and we've concluded investigations on a number of complaints. So we are just waiting for a tribunal to kick off so that these cases are heard. We are doing civic education. We continue to do civic education because at least that doesn't involve the, the sitting of a tribunal, that legal mandate of a tribunal. We are continuing to do human rights awareness. We continue to inspect places of detention. We continue to go to prisons and police stations to inspect places of detention and assess the condition of suspects and inmates. And thereafter, we document, prepare reports, and engage the relevant stakeholders. Okay. So we are carrying out a big chunk of our mandate, although one of the key processes that we can't do because of its legal nature is conduct tribunals.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, maybe just before we even move on, which cases particularly fall under the category of torture victims? Because there are lots of cases, including acid, survivors and victims. In COVID-19 season, we're talking about victims of sexual and gender-based violence. Do they also fall under there? Which category would you particularly look at as falling under, torture? Okay.
Mildred, allow me to briefly give our viewers the definition of torture.
Yes.
Torture under the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act is defined as an act or omission intentionally committed by one person towards another, and which causes severe pain. Severe, the key word here is severe. Severe pain or suffering, and it is done for a purpose, either to obtain information, to obtain a confession, to punish or to intimidate a person. And this act may be committed by a government official or someone acting in their individual capacity. So it now brings me to your question. We have...
But before you even go to my question, you emphasize severe. Who determines severity in this case?
Okay. We have a schedule at the back of the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act that gives a whole list of actions that amount to torture. Someone being beaten severely, someone being punched, someone jumping on another's stomach. Joachim here mentioned that he was locked up in a room and they poured water.
And after beating me.
Yeah, and after beating him. So that is one of those instances that they poured water so that he would be in an uncomfortable position, but also a cold position. So they expose you to either extreme heat or extreme cold circumstances. Putting a polythene bag over your head so that you asphyxiate as if you are losing your breath. Pouring water on your head or in your mouth so that you get a sensation of drowning. But then it also includes using certain substances like acid to cause severe pain or suffering.
Okay.
So that's where acid survivors also come in, that pouring acid on someone causes severe pain and suffering, so it also amounts to torture. Issues of sexual gender-based violence. The level of severity matters, and you asked who determines severity. That is where our medical practitioners come in. That when you send someone to be examined by a medical practitioner, they're able to categorize the level of pain that person suffered. Whether it was severe, whether it was mild, they're able to categorize it. So it also guides us to know that this amounted to torture. So with sexual and gender-based violence, depending on whether it's a man or a woman, they are able to report either to police or to any health institution, and when they are assessed, whether they went through severe trauma, that would be able to guide us And the fact that it was committed by a private individual, I think that's very important, that that private individual, whether the husband or the wife, or whether it is a parent towards a child, that private individual falls within the category or falls within the ambit of those who are able to commit acts of torture. Recently, we had a case that shocked the world of a mother who tortured her child. I think we all saw that in the media. And she was punishing the child for having done something. We were all shocked by that action. And we were all hoping that this case was going to be prosecuted under the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act because it exhibited all the ingredients. The child was subjected to severe pain, severe beatings, which led to wounds, and he suffered severe pain, and it was committed by his mother, and it was a punishment. And you see, under the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act, we have what is called aggravated torture. Aggravated torture applies to specific categories. Someone could be tortured when they are pregnant. Someone could be tortured when they are a person with a disability. Someone who is tortured when they were a child, which was the case in this particular scenario. So if under aggravated torture that mother was found guilty, they would be sentenced to life imprisonment. So we need to see more prosecutions, Mildred, under the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act. We need to test this law to see its effectiveness, even against private individuals.
All right. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Ms. Ida Nachiganda. Our time is really getting fast spent, and yet the conversation is pretty interesting, very educative. And but we will need to wind up in just a bit, and we will also be having closing remarks from Robert Kochani, who is the country representative, UN Human Rights Commission. But let me start off with you, Mr. Wamani Joachim, on your closing remarks. As we commemorate this day, and I would love that this is not a discussion that only comes up on such days, but that it's a continuous discussion, what would be your recommendations, your closing remarks to the discussion?
Torture should stop, because there are so many people out there who are facing torture, and they have no access to report, and they have no access to justice. They're just there. Because this one needs to understand someone really, like the way I've told you. Way back, I went to SCTV. Those people treated me well, and I'm among the peer supporters who are trying to help these people out there, to help them recover. When you meet your fellow survivor, you try to encourage him or her. You tell him a word of encouragement, of course, to live. Because when you're tortured, you're mentally disturbed.
Totally different.
That trauma, those nightmares you go through. Because I personally, when I was in that detention, I saw one of my colleagues whom I was with. I never tried to follow up his case, what was his case, but he died when I was seeing. I used to sleep standing. At times you'd sleep in the water, you're feeling pain, you're being tortured, you feel that pain, you're mentally disturbed. Those things, honestly speaking, torture should stop.
Just a simple one, it definitely has to stop. But I love that you're talking about, peer-to-peer kind of engagement.
Yeah.
What I went through, I may think it is very terrible, but yet someone went through
and you
more
end up either
one.
committing suicide or diverting to alcohol, those things.
Okay.
You give the word of encouragement to your fellow peer.
Yeah.
That's all I can say.
Very, very key. I think that's very key, and it's very emotional to even talk about, having to talk to someone, yet you literally went through the same pain. Let me go to ASP Isaac Owana to give us your closing remarks, and what pledge would you give on behalf of the Uganda Police Force, of course, due to institutional mechanisms that you're putting in place with regard to bringing an end to torture?
Thank you, Mildred. I want the public to know that police does not in any way condone torture. We are there to serve. We also encourage we also encourage the public, those who are tortured or whose relatives are tortured, if they are not able to report, anyone can come and make a report on their behalf. Work with us. We shall have you served. We shall have justice brought to every Ugandan. We have police stations all over. At least every sub-county has a police post. Have reports made to those police posts. If you fear, if maybe the perpetrators are police officers, we have a fully fledged professional standards unit, better known as PSU, which is charged with ensuring that police officers work within their mandate and are professional in performing their duties.
Much, and like the saying always goes, a promise is a debt. But thank you so much for engaging in the conversation. Let me cross over to Ms. Ida Nachiganda with your closing remarks and those who are losing hope when you talked about, the failure to have a chairman and how that's affecting your constitutional mandate.
First and foremost, to thank all the viewers who have watched us this evening. We encourage our clients and everybody out there not to lose hope. We as staff of the Commission are still hopeful and are out here to serve you with the best that we can. The theme for today's commemoration is support torture victims to report and access justice. So I would like to encourage victims of torture to report their complaints, to report their cases to the Uganda Human Rights Commission, to the police, so that we can document and investigate. And timely reporting is very important because it allows us to get the best evidence. When someone has been tortured, it's important to see the fresh wounds. It's important that they come when their memory is still fresh, they can still relay their story, and they can still remember what exactly happened to them. So timely reporting is very important. Secondly, we are going to step up. We've always done awareness, but it's important as stakeholders to continue with our struggle in the awareness sector, raising awareness for all the key stakeholders, the duty bearers and the rights holders. The duty bearers includes police, includes the army, includes prisons, but it also includes prosecutors, it includes judicial officers, because these laws are fairly new. And we are wondering why there are challenges in implementing them. So we need to raise awareness so that the stakeholders are familiar with the laws and are able to implement them.
All right, thank you very much. Ms. Irene Nachimbugwe, you'll have the last say before we get our closing remarks from Mr. Kuchane.
My humble appeal goes to the citizenry. Please, let's work together with the institutions that are in place to end torture. Appealing to individuals in your communities. You might be out there yet you know about torturous incidences that are going on. Please go ahead and report to your nearest police or any other institution that is near you so that we can bring these perpetrators to book.
All right, thank you very much. A very enlightening discussion here. But before we officially get to close it off, let's get our closing remarks from Mr. Robert Kochani, who is the country representative, UN Human Rights Office. Over to you, Mr. Kochani.
Thank you, Mildred. And if you allow me, Mildred, at the beginning, I was supposed to also read after mine the remarks of the chairperson of the Uganda Human Rights Commission who could not make it. So if you allow me, I will read it quickly before I say a few words of conclusion. Good. So this statement is read on behalf of Dr. Katebalirwe Amoti, who is the acting chairperson of the Uganda Human Rights Commission. I'm reading the statement because he couldn't make it for technical reasons. So I'm going to read in extenso the papers, I mean, the speech that he sent to me. It reads as follows. Key stakeholders in the protection and promotion of human rights agenda, fellow conveners of this e-public dialogue, our distinguished panelists, esteemed viewers tonight. I am honored to speak to you today as the representative of partners under the Coalition Against Torture and welcome all of you to this e-public dialogue. The Uganda Human Rights Commission, together with the Coalition Against Torture, chaired by the African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims, ACTV, and other key partners are today leading the way by holding a joint national commemoration of the International Day in support of victims of torture. That falls every 26th June, which is today. The UHRC, as the national human rights institution with key partners, are jointly commemorating the day this year with specific focus on torture survivors. The theme for this year's commemoration, therefore, is support torture survivors to report and access justice. This year's joint commemoration comes at a time where there is a global fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, which Uganda already facing the effects of the second wave of the pandemic, which has necessitated another lockdown as a measure to curb its spread. The need to enforce standard operating procedures, directive and guidelines from government in combating the pandemic came with challenges for both state and non-state actors in the realization of respect, promotion, and fulfillment of human rights across the globe, including Uganda. As we commemorate this day, we would therefore like to reiterate the fact that the fight for human rights observance is a fight for everyone and therefore call for everyone's active participation. The UHRC and its partners are, however, happy to know that Uganda has expressly committed to national, regional, and international human rights instruments to underscore her will to work toward the realization and enjoyment of human rights. In this regard, Uganda has allowed to subject its even international procedures such as pre-universal periodic review processes, among others. It is therefore through such review mechanisms that areas that require improvement in the human rights situation in Uganda with regard to the right to freedom from and ill treatment have been continuously identified and addressed by the relevant stakeholders and authorities. The critical issues of focus during this commemoration include the need for timely reporting, investigations, professional documentation to aid access to justice and rehabilitation for torture survivors. Today, as we commemorate this day, the UHRC and partners jointly raise our voices to all on the relevant stakeholders to play their parts in addressing the above issues of concern as one of the ways to improve the realization of the right to freedom from torture in Uganda going forward. Today, we also remind ourselves that the constitutional provision for the right to freedom from torture and ill treatment as an absolute right deserves everyone's attention, especially when the available statistics and trend to date show continued reports and the registration of allegations of torture as the most violated human rights in our country. UHRC, ACTV, and other stakeholders regrettably continue to register complaints of alleged torture, order for compensation award to the survivors, and offer treatment and rehabilitation services to survivors of alleged torture and other cruel ill treatment. Whereas cases registered mainly show that most perpetrators were from security agencies, including UPDF, UPF, and UPS. There have also been who included local leaders and politicians. As partners and human rights defenders, we also note that many incidents of torture go unreported due to fear among the victims because of stigma and fear of reprisal from the perpetrators. This situation is exacerbated by the absence of the witness protection law, which has also caused fear and stigma among witnesses and victims who do not report crime, abuses, and violations to relevant authorities. Failure to report cases of torture by victims inevitably hampers effective documentation of the vice, which is critical in aiding investigations, ultimately jeopardizing access to justice and rehabilitation services for the victims. We therefore join our voices today to jointly shine a light on the issues above with a view of advocating for durable solutions that I trust will be discussed by our distinguished panelists who are here today to represent the various stakeholders. As we commemorate this year's UN Day in support of victims of tortures, the UHRC and partners recognize the progress so far made by Uganda in line with efforts toward the realization and enjoyment of the right to freedom from torture. We, for instance, jointly welcome the new policy and practice by security agencies to individually prosecute errant security officers found in violation of Article 24 and 44A of the 1995 Constitution of the Republic of Uganda, which guarantees the right to freedom from torture. We also applaud stakeholders in the criminal justice system for the steps taken so far to popularize the Human Rights Enforcement Act 2019, which is a testimony of their commitment to the promotion of the principle of personal liability and punishment for human rights abuses and violations for both state and non-state actors. This year's joint commemoration specifically emphasizes the current impediments to reporting and accessing justice by survivors of torture. The UHRC and partners are under the coalition against torture. Therefore, without preempting the debates by our distinguished panelists tonight, recommend the following measures aimed at addressing the impediment highlighted above. The Uganda Police Force, together with the Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Affairs, should continue to popularize the use of the 2017 regulations to prevent and prohibition of torture to enable effective documentation of torture cases in the country. The DPP, together with the relevant security agencies, should increase the use of court sanctions and punishment for officers found in violation of Article 24 and 44A of the 1995 Constitution and Section 2, 4, and 7 of the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act number 3 of 2012, as opposed to the commonly used administrative sanctions, which are less punitive and deterrent in nature. The Ministry of Health should mainstream treatment and rehabilitation of survivors of torture in its national health management system to enable documentation and tracking for access to justice of the survivors. Uganda should ratify the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture 2006 to enable unlimited access to places of detention by all right defenders, thereby promoting preventive mechanisms which are less costly compared to the remedial mechanisms that are more costly in terms of time and resources. The Witness Protection Bill should be enacted into law in order for witnesses to have the confidence to provide evidence of torture occurrences in the courts of law and other jurisdictions. Members of the general public should always report all incidents of torture to the relevant authorities in order for the survivors of torture to access rehabilitation and justice. The appointing authority is requested to fast-track the appointment of a substantive chairperson for the National Human Rights Commission to address the plight of the indigent victims of human rights violations seeking to access justice through the UHRC tribunals that are currently non-functional due to lack of quorum as legally required. Government is urged to put in place mechanisms that will enable survivors of torture to get their compensation award in a timely manner. Uganda Prison Services should increase effort to decongest prisons in the country in order to improve the enjoyment of the right to freedom from torture and ill treatment, which is usually under threat in the congested prisons. Permit me to conclude my remarks by expressing our gratitude to the government of Uganda and the development partners who include the German-Ugandan Development Corporation, GIZ, United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, OHCHR, and the International Rehabilitation Council for Torture Victims, IRCT, for the support that they have enabled this important event to happen despite the lockdown challenges. We urge members of the public to join the conversation on the theme of today's commemoration by actively participating and sharing your views to the subject using the various online and digital platforms as well as the conventional media platforms. We invite you to join the conversation on social media platform and also through the hashtag Justice for Torture Survivors. Today, more than ever before, we encourage torture survivors to continue reporting incidents of torture in a bid to address justice. We wish all the Ugandans a meaningful and fruitful conversation on torture-related issues during this year's commemoration and urge you to stay safe from COVID-19 and continue to strictly observe and respect all the guidance from the government and the COVID-19 National Task Force in order to combat the pandemic. Finally, I wish all of you fruitful deliberation and hereby declare this public dialogue officially open for God and my country. Signed by Dr. Katebalirwe Amoti wa Irumba, Acting Chairperson, Uganda Human Rights Commission.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robert Kochani, for the remarks and, of course, for reading to us out loud the message. Those are great recommendations that I do not want to repeat, but I just want to say thank you for participating in this particular discussion. Allow me to say a very special thank you to you, Aida Nachiganda, the Director of Complaints, Investigations and Legal Services. Thank you for coming through, and the deliberations were very enlightening. To Ms. Irene Nachimbugwe, the Deputy Public Relations Officer at the Office of the DPP, regards to, and thank you for all the work you're doing, and thank you for coming through to this discussion. I also heard Mr. Wamani Joachim Kim. Thank you so much for sharing your story. That was very inspirational and a great take that we're talking about peer engagement. And I also heard ASP in charge of legal at the Uganda Police Force, Mr. Isaac Owona. Thank you so much, Afande, for joining us. And to you, Mr. Robert Kochani, the country representative, UN Office of the Human Rights. Thank you so much for as well coming through. We cannot continue. I can see curfew is as well knocking on the door at the end of the day. But I leave by saying let's observe the standard operating procedures. COVID-19 is real. Let us observe these SOPs and make sure that we bring down the statistics and numbers. Like I always say, it could be easier to be locked down for a few days than it will be for you to lock down or close a casket of your loved one forever. Let's stay safe and stay at home. I'm Mildred Tohaisa. Have a good evening and God bless you.